You're listening to the Veterinary Innovation Podcast.
You're listening to the Veterinary Innovation Podcast. My name is Sean Wilkie, and along with my awesome co-host, we interview the innovators in this space every week. Excited for this week's episode. Ivan, go ahead and get us started.
Hey, I'm Ivan Zach. Very excited about our guest today. We have Rachel Sheppard. Rachel Sheppard joined Mars Pet Care as a Director of Ventures in 2021. She comes from a background of startup mentorship and advising global marketing and veterinary care. Rachel is thrilled to co-lead the Leap Venture Studio and Academy, which brings together her passions for veterinary medicine and supporting startups. Rachel lives in Northern California, and we're in a blanket right now as we can see her because it's cold, and is mom to a 12-year-old Corgi and a 3-year-old Saint Bernard. Rachel, welcome to the show. Thank you for finding the time.
Thank you so much for having me, Ivan and Sean. I really appreciate it.
So I peeked at your LinkedIn, and as I kept scrolling and scrolling and scrolling through your experience, I came to the bottom of it, and you worked in the vet clinic. So that's awesome. But then all the incredible experience beyond that and all these tech startup companies and then the bigger companies in which you were a mentor, a co-creator, you were in so many different avenues of the entrepreneurship that I'm very excited to dip into that and understand what you're doing at Mars Pet Care. But can you just give us a 45-second, how did you end up from vet assistant into running the biggest company's ventures department in veterinary industry?
Yeah, for sure. So as you mentioned, I studied animal science and management at Davis and was pre-vet. And so my plan originally was to go to veterinary school. I ultimately decided not to go to veterinary school and actually got my MBA in entrepreneurship instead. So right out of college, I worked as a veterinary assistant. As everybody who's tried to go to veterinary school knows, you need hands-on experience to go to veterinary school. And so I was working quite a bit in veterinary hospitals, and I was lucky enough to find a really great vet hospital in Davis that would take me on and allowed me to clean cages and sort of help out where I could. And I just kind of used that opportunity to continue to build my experience. And so after working as a veterinary assistant for several years, I decided to go get my MBA, focused on entrepreneurship, loved the growth stages of companies, bounced around to several different companies, as you mentioned, and kind of learned a lot doing so. Everything from large companies working as an intern to working at Series A, post-Series A startups, and then ultimately spent a large part of my career working at a pre-seed accelerator as their director of global marketing. And there, I also co-created the Female Founder Initiative to help more women start companies around the world, because we were operating in over 90 countries. And I just saw a wonderful opportunity to really invite women to start a lot of companies and see if we could, by changing some of the ways that we operated and marketed our program, were we able to actually see an increase in the number of women starting companies. And we did. We doubled that number by the time I left. And the whole time I was sort of paying attention to pet care. What's going on in pet care? I couldn't quite let it go, even though I had stopped working at a veterinary hospital. Having that experience is just super unique. And I don't think a lot of people are walking around in tech, at least at the time that I was working in tech originally, who had worked in veterinary hospitals. So I had actually joined the Leap Venture Studio Slack group, which I now run as just a member, and started to connect with some of the founders and connected with the previous organizer. And then, right as we're starting to get to what I would say is slightly the other side of the pandemic. So about a year or so into it, I had reached back out to him and had said, hey, how can I best be of help? And the reason I did that, not to go too long, but is because my husband and I had adopted a very senior Newfoundland just before the shutdown in 2019. He was 9 years old. And he was amazing. His name was Brinkley. He was 140 pounds. He looked like a small bear walking around behind me in my office. And he was just the sweetest dog in the world. And then sadly, we lost him in March of 2021. And when we did, I just felt this strong pull to go back to pet care. Like, I have this experience. I want to make a difference. I want to help startups make a difference for pets. I want them to live longer, happier, healthier lives. I want all of that. And so, and I felt a need to go back and see if I could make a difference. And so that's why I reached out to the Leap coordinator, and that's how I got this role.
That's so cool. Well, Rachel, it's great to have you here. I have maybe a silly question because your title is confusing to me. Director of Ventures. So it sounds like you're a venture capitalist. But what do you actually do at Leap?
Yeah, so at Leap, we do make investments. So we run a seed stage accelerator, and Mars does this in partnership with Michelson Found Animals. And for the studio program, which is our 12-week seed stage accelerator, we also run that in partnership with RJ Ventures. And so as partners, we invest $200,000 in each of the companies we bring through our program. And so to date, we have 40 companies in our portfolio. So we've made investments in all of those. And as the director of ventures, the core part of my role is running the LEAP program. So that's the studio program plus the academy, which is all of the activities we do for earlier stage companies as well, including the Slack group I mentioned that has 1,200 startups in it right now, or 1,200 people, and which represents a lot of startups in it at the moment. We also have our boot camp and fellowship programs that are shorter, sort of 4 or 5 day programs that help support startups. And then we also have, sort of these other opportunities for pitch competitions and other things at conferences as well that we do just to help startups in any way we can. So there's this like greater ether of helping as many startups as possible. Then there's the studio program. And as the director of ventures, I have 2 other parts of my role. The other part is to make sure that we're creating deal flow opportunities, not just for later stage investment vehicles that focus on pet care, but also are there other investors out there who want to invest in pet care? And I get to have a lot of those great conversations where people are saying, I've thought about investing in pet care. What do you think? And then we can have a conversation about, how does investing in SaaS platforms actually translate into investing in pet care? So I try to provide a lot of deal flow for investors out there. And then lastly, I try to provide as many connections as possible to folks within Mars Pet Care to startups. Sometimes that's because they want to mentor a startup and they can do so through our program. Sometimes it's because a startup is solving something that we as Mars are working on. And how great would it be if we can collaborate together and see if we can make that happen? So there are a lot of sort of activities I'm doing that fall under many categories, everything from investment to sort of more traditional corporate venture activities.
That's amazing. That's quite the job description. So I'll put you on the spot for our listeners. So we have quite a lot of listeners. I think we're over 100,000 in the veterinary domain, and quite a lot of entrepreneurs that come. Well, that's exactly what we do. We interview majority of people that you probably talk to. So for many people, I think that Leap Venture Studio is something that they really want to be in, because we're very focused on only veterinary domain entrepreneurs. So give us 5 things you need to make sure that you have or know when you're coming to the pitch day as an entrepreneur to actually succeed in the pitch to Mars. You can do 3. If you don't have 5, you can do 3. Yeah.
Way to put her on the spot, Ivan. You're making it so difficult.
No, it's good because it is important, right? So when you apply to a Leap Venture Studio program and we are looking at your pitch deck, there are some specific things, and I'll speak more for myself and then a little bit for general, like I know what we're looking at. The first thing we're looking at, because we're investing at such an early stage, typically seed is post-product pre-revenue in most cases. And at this stage, we're looking at the team. Can the team do this? Is this something that they are uniquely positioned to do? Is the team itself a competitive advantage, right? What is their experience? And oftentimes, if it's a veterinarian solving for something for veterinary medicine, obviously that gives them some level of competitive advantage, right? But what is that beyond that? How does that work for the founding team? The second is, I'm going to say traction, and then I'll elaborate. So traction is something we really look for. And what I'm looking for there is, what data can you show us that says that somebody wants this solution? There are a lot of solutions out there in pet care. And, unless you're creating something that's incredibly new and innovative, there's most likely then we've looked at 2 to 10 other solutions that look like it. So how are we going to tell if somebody wants your solution versus someone else's? And the way that we can look at that on paper, so to speak, and see that is through data. So showcase to us how your traction is looking. How much is it costing you to get a customer? What is your sales cycle looking like? And also, how is that growing over time? Data over time is really the biggest storytelling opportunity that any founder has. So showcase that to us. And then the last thing that I typically, we definitely look at is the business model. Do we think the business model could work? Do we think that they're approaching a business model in a unique way? Again, we look at a lot of solutions. And so when we're looking at something, we want to see you think about it a little bit differently. And sometimes that first step is really making sure you know everything about all the other players in that sector of your ecosystem, and then knowing how you fit in compared to them. And again, why customers are going to pick up your solution versus others, and then why your team is going to be the team to lead this into the future. Because the reality is, at the end of the day, you will make a pivot, most likely. If you have a decently long, sort of life cycle of your company, there will be some pivot, big or small, that ends up happening because of macroeconomics, because of the significant shift in the industry, because of significant shifts in consumer behavior, because of something we can't see coming, right? Like there's all these different reasons why companies shift, and we have to trust that you're the team to make that happen regardless, right? Because we're investing, so we're doing this for the long term, and we want to make sure that you're the team to do that. So I hope that's helpful, but those are my three.
Makes tons of sense, Rachel. So we've been interviewing, me and Ivan, people in the veterinary industry, innovators, for about 3 years now. It all started back at the Veterinary Innovation Summit, where me and Ivan conceived of having a podcast, and it's been really interesting. One question that I have for you is, like, you've been around Leap for a couple of years. You've been working there for about 1.5 years now. I think it said in your LinkedIn profile that I was scrolling through as well. What have you seen as far as changes? Is there more applications to your programming? Is there any trends that are kind of like interesting that you can share with our listeners?
Absolutely. So, have I seen any changes? Yes. We have seen an increase in applications for sure. And I think what's super interesting is this year, for the first time ever in 2022, we ran our first regional specific program. So we went to Europe and ran a Europe specific studio this year, in addition to a global studio. And I think what we learned from that is there are so many more solutions out there that we can connect with on a more regional level around the world. And there are a lot of areas of the world where we're seeing pet care grow exponentially. And we're seeing that happen globally, but even in some areas of the world, we're seeing it grow even faster. And so we're seeing more and more applications from Latin America, from Europe, from other parts of the world, even Australia, New Zealand, Africa, India. We're starting to see more and more regions pay attention to pet care as a potential place to innovate. And also for people to see, as their pet parent journey progresses, they see and experience the problems as a pet parent, and they're like, I want to solve this, and they're innovators at heart. So we're seeing a ton of this beautiful innovation happening on a global scale. And I would say that's something I'm really noticing is just more and more people thinking about pet care as a great industry to innovate in. The second biggest trend I will see is this significant shift towards digitization. So I think we've been on this journey towards digitization for a while, and now I'm hearing this conversation accelerate quite a bit amongst people we talk to at conferences, and you can also see it in the solutions that we're seeing. Some of that is a response to the new and growing generations that we know are taking over more and more of pet care and pet parenthood, I should say, and that's millennials and Gen Z. And I think some of this is also about simplifying the pet parent journey, and keeping pet parenthood accessible. Pet parenthood accessibility is something I really am focused on right now. And again, this is me as a person's perspective. And as I look at applications, I just know with the macroeconomics being what they are, and pet parenthood having gone through significant shifts from everybody being locked down with their pets now to people trying to transition to going back to work, and people trying to figure out how to be hybrid people, let alone hybrid pet parents, meaning, some stuff's in person, some stuff's on the computer still. I think there's so much of that there's a huge opportunity to say, okay, if somebody wants to provide a pet with a loving home and give them everything they need in terms of basic food, veterinary care, etc., how do we make that possible for them at a price point that's accessible to them? And how do we create the right resources in their area of the world that allows pet parenthood to still be something that they can experience the joys of? Because we all know being a pet parent is incredibly joyful. So how do we make sure that that remains accessible to everyone in as many ways as we can possibly make it? And I think digitization's a part of that as well.
It's very interesting, and so I'll ask you a question on the other side of things. So increasing, I'm not surprised that the solutions increase and the number of people that come up with the solutions. But given the macroeconomics right now, especially in the last sort of 7 to 9 months, when the markets are crashing, I hear more and more entrepreneurs having a lot of trouble raising capital. So has that changed recently with the softening of the multiples of the clinics, the frenzy of the acquisitions sort of kind of slowed down? Do you see the same in the investment world into tech startups? And is the investment community more reserved now, looking at what's happening? Or maybe it's the other way around. They're taking the money off the markets and investing more into the future. So what are you seeing there?
I wish it was clear cut, but it really isn't, right? It's kind of a little bit of all of the things. So on one hand, we're seeing a lot of people sort of hesitate, unsure about the future, as we all are in terms of macroeconomics and so some checks not being written, some deals not getting done, harder times raising funds. I think everybody's having a harder time raising funds, at least, from what I've experienced and seen. But then there are some people who are still getting deals done, and there are still rounds being closed. And so it's not like it's across the board, nothing, it's all or nothing. It's really kind of a mixture of everything. And I would also say I am having a lot of conversations with funds that are saying, hey, I'm interested in pet care. I'm super bullish on what pet care has to offer in the future as an investor. And so, I would say in the last 6 months or so, I've had conversations with funds who have sought out to talk to us as Leap and say, hey, do you have any deals? We're super interested in, what pet care is going to be doing in the next 6 months to a year. So while on one hand, we're seeing a slowing down of things, I think we're also seeing a shift to some folks starting to pay attention to what's happening in pet care, who are maybe ancillary to the industry as, at this moment, but are going to start getting more active in this industry pretty quickly. So some good and some, difficult, I would say, at this moment, but it's not all bleak. And I think so much of that is because we are in pet care, which is an industry that has traditionally not had its spending slow down as much as other industries. And that's because, as pet parents, as caregivers, there's just so much more people are willing to spend on their pets today. And I think I saw a data point the other day that was talking about people are spending, people have yet to slow down their spending on pet care, despite, sort of macroeconomics being what they are. And people don't really plan to either. But, they're just going to continue to try to make that happen because pets are part of the family. And so, they're part of the essential spending. So that's some of the things we're seeing right now, if that answers your question.
Yeah, the humanization of the pet is very strong and it's continuing. So not only our industry is getting more pets in the households, but we love them more than we used to maybe 30 years ago. So with that, and I hate to notice that we're close to the end, but I want to ask you, with everything that you do right now in the industry, talking to multiple startups and then talking to multiple investors, connecting the industry, what is that when you wake up in the morning gets you excited about what you do? And how is that aligned with the Mars vision on the job that you're doing?
Oh, I love this question. What gets me up in the morning and gets me excited about what I do is really, I am incredibly lucky to be able to be close to startup founders. Startup founders have an incredible energy about them because they're trying to take on essentially a huge part of how the world operates and change it. And that takes a certain level of energy to say, like, I'm going to change how we do everything in this industry or in this segment. And I think it's just truly incredible. So I'm really just, super overjoyed and blessed that someone pays me to do this, honestly, that Mars pays me to do this. But I would say some of the things that I get really excited about are innovations in veterinary medicine. Having worked as an assistant and in a hospital, so many of the listeners you have on this podcast, but also the guests that you've had, also know what it's like to work in hospital environments. And it can be challenging, but it can also be incredibly joyful. And so I'm really drawn to these solutions that help more people want to be part of veterinary medicine, help make that a really great job, and help us continue to innovate and create more efficiencies in vet hospitals that are designed, those efficiencies that are designed for the people of veterinary medicine, not necessarily sort of outside looking in, but people who are really, have that experience working in a hospital and they're saying, this is how it should be done. I think those are the things that really get me excited, just because I know we have a long way to go, but I think that there is an incredible opportunity to change how we care for the people who care for our pets. And I think that those types of solutions just really draw me in because of my experience as well.
That's awesome, Rachel. One quick question for you before we wrap up here. 3 companies that you think our listeners should check out if they haven't heard about them yet.
That's a great question. It really puts me on the spot because there are 40 wonderful companies in our portfolio, and they also represent 10 different countries. So there's a lot of different innovation going on here. There are a few, though, that come to the top of my mind. And I would say one is Hound, who I know that you've interviewed also, is Andrew Luna. He's doing some amazing work, him and his team, on really addressing the needs of veterinary medicine. So kind of what I just talked about, is really just making sure that the future of veterinary medicine is cared for by people who work in veterinary medicine, right? That's what I would definitely say. One of the others I would say is Mixed Lab. So Mixed Lab, Fred from Mixed Lab, he's really working on, how do we change how people get access to pharmaceuticals as pet parents, and how do we scale compounding, pharmaceutical solutions for veterinarians. And so that's another one. And then one of the other ones I'll say that we just invested in. So we just had our demo day yesterday, sort of as we're recording this, is Moggy, and it's an activity tracker for cats. But it's also has components of actually translating cats' activity into communicating with you as a pet parent on what's going on. So you could get like a message from your cat that says, I've been sleeping all day, why don't you join me, or something along those lines. So something that actually sort of translates what that activity means. And then, also at the same time, alerting you if it's something that's, different or something you need to be concerned about. Because as we all know, cats can hide their symptoms really, really well. And so hopefully this data over time can really help sort of track those nuances of an individual cat and then cats as a species, and better help us as cat parents understand how things are changing over time and if there's a need to be concerned about someone's cat health. So I think that's really an exciting innovation as well.
Awesome, Rachel. Well, listen, it was a great conversation and super fun to have you on. We wrap up the same way every time. The question we've got for you is a book, YouTube, TED Talk recommendation, something you found interesting that you'd like to share with our guests.
So one of the things I'm really excited about and I recommend is there's a podcast called VITALIZE, and it's run by VITALIZE VC. For founders out there, I would highly recommend checking it out. Gail Wilkinson runs VITALIZE, and her and her team, Justin, they interview a lot of different investors and founders across the industry. And Gail has always really believed in transparency when it comes to investments. And so I shouldn't speak for her, but she's always shared a lot and really, really shared a ton about how to invest and what investment looks like and how she makes decisions and what's happening in the background and why investors tell you the things that they do. And I think for founders and also people who are interested in investing in the future, it's incredibly powerful information, and not that many people I think are transparent about those types of decisions. So I really appreciate the VITALIZE podcast. The second I would say is a book called Joyful by Ingrid Fetell Lee, which is a book about the inherent design elements that bring us joy as humans. So I think it's really interesting. She used to work for IDEO as a designer, and I think it can really change how you see the world when you understand what brings you joy as a person. But I also think it can change, if you're a founder, how you design solutions, because you can better understand what brings people joy. Like I don't know if this has happened to you, but you can go on a website and understand if you feel joyful or not. And I think so much about that really comes down to these elements of design that are, really inherent to who we are as people and how our brain has developed from an evolutionary perspective. And I think that book's really, really interesting and also just really fun because it makes you feel good and reminds you that joy is everywhere.
Very interesting. And then with you, I kind of want to modify our next question because we always have a question about a entrepreneur that you would recommend inviting here. And I kind of inclined to ask you, can you name 100 entrepreneurs that we should invite to this podcast in the next 100 episodes? But we'll keep it to one. So this is going to be very special. No pressure. Who do you want us to invite on this podcast?
Yes. I could name 100, and we can talk about that, via email. But I would highly recommend speaking with Melissa Michener. She is the founder of the Bark Shop and the New York Institute of Pet Grooming. She is an incredible founder and a wonderful human being, and I think you'll just have a wonderful conversation with her.
Thank you so much for listening to the Veterinary Innovation Podcast. If you want to hear about our new episodes, please follow us on any social media channel. Also, you can check out our website at veterinarynnovationpodcast.com. See you next week.